Hello. I wanted to do something a little bit different this time, in part to address a number of things I've called out or mentioned or highlighted before, and to respond to a really good comment that I've got on screen now that Travis Tucker left a couple weeks ago. Basically, to start in, Happy New Year. I appreciate the efforts that you've made. Good compliment. Thank you. Appreciate it. One thing that really eggs me to comment on. So something he's noticed a few other controllers have been using the phrase upon reaching altitude, contact departure. Obviously, a phrase I'm using nonstop right now to try and save some time. One of those other controllers started using this phrase, and from the very beginning of Tower Simulator, as a former FAA controller, I can only say that this is totally wrong. 100% correct. Simply stated, it is not used in that context. The proper usage of the instruction is to issue the command after the aircraft is observed either visually, by sight, or on radar at the appropriate handoff altitude. Dive into, so there is the official FAA controller's handbook that he's referencing, and how to get to it. Highlights that there's some inappropriate usage that can be an easy trap to fall into, and highlights some laziness in the simulation, which is definitely true. There's a few things I want to call out to not necessarily address this, but just to kind of highlight what's going on for somebody who really doesn't quite understand. I'm not claiming to be an expert. I am not a controller. I'm just a complete amateur who enjoys this type of stuff online. But at airports, let me pull this up in a bigger screen here. You can see there's a number of different types of classes to the airspace. Class B being large airports, Class C moderate airports, Class D smaller airports, and then the Class G for, I believe they have like unmanned or sometimes manned towers, and then no towered airports, and then Class A, anything way up high. And in these, they've got them stacked in different tiers, of course, because they go up to different altitudes and different sizes and areas. But I'm controlling a large airport, so that's going to be a Class B style of airspace. And in this, a lot of different waypoints that airplanes come and go. And if you look at any of my flight simulator videos where I'm doing the piloting role, there's lots of different waypoints that are marked out within the area that the airplanes come in through. And the closer you get to a city, the fewer options you have because you're on a specific route into that airport based on weather, wind direction, traffic patterns, where you're even coming from, all dictate which number of waypoints you're going to fly down and into that airport. As you get close to the airport and in reverse on departure from an airport, you get handed through a number of different controllers as you descend through different levels of altitude and get closer to the airport. In the game, when you look at that map, we're covering a very large space around the airport. And if I recall correctly, most airplanes are not handed off to the actual tower at the airport that far out. Usually, they'll be cleared for an approach to a certain runway, which again is true in the handoff to me. But they're cleared way, way out there, whereas I believe you're cleared to the airport much closer. General ATC and arrival controllers will line you up, get you in through the waypoints, stack you, and you're pretty much on your way into the runway and on approach. And then they transition you over to the tower when you're on final or closer, not quite final, but a bit closer, so that they can clear you down and the last leg down to the airport. Now, please correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that is my understanding. So the way the game displays it, the airplanes are already stacked up for 20, 30, 40, 50 miles out, already lined up, ready to come in, and that's where it's not quite realistic. But again, the way the game is mapped out and setting up, they just arrive, and your job is to get them down and then to their terminal. Whereas in real life, there's planes coming from 9, 10 different directions. As you see on departure, once I contact departure, have the plane transfer out to departure, they start to split. But what I mean in this is when the plane takes off, and as his comment says, there's an altitude where we're going to transfer them out of my control over to departure. Now, the way the game sets, all airplanes will fly runway heading, which means they'll just fly out on the runway. I've done others where I've tried to change their direction and then look at what they're doing and send them on their way. But at a busy airport like this, my preferred way of playing is to try to run at 100% of the game's traffic which means I'm dealing with arrivals and departures, which no one controller at one of these airports is really dealing with. And with that, I have to make some sacrifices because I'm not very good at this in order to maneuver where I'm going with these airplanes and what I'm doing. So instead of watching my departures altitude hit that set limit of whatever I've deemed or whatever the reality is, when they hit 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, or 5,000 feet, wherever they are, when they hit that level, I then transfer them out to departure because below that, they're in my jurisdiction. Then you transfer them to the next level of departure, who will get them up another leg. They will transfer them somewhere else, and eventually they'll get up above 18, 20,000 feet, which is kind of where the standard is based off of sea level. I think that's what MSL stands for. And once they're up there, they're with main ATC, who will route them over the larger air paths between the different waypoints and cities and all that stuff. Now, that's very generalized. I know there's so much more to it, but the game wasn't designed to process that level of play. I used to play a different game called ATC Simulator 2, and that was the main ATC that would route them down to the airports. And the way I would transfer them out from my control was contact tower, and then I had to give them the frequency of that airport's arrival tower. There were a couple of different options I could use in that game. And similarly, when one of these class B, C, or D airspace airports would finish with their level of routing in the lower tiers, they would send them off to me, and I would manage the region of that whole area. And then I would contact them up or transfer them to the next ATC group that they were going to go to when they left my airspace. So all that said, in the way the game is designed, it's not really allowing us to flow through everything. Now, we can certainly change how we manage things, and the airport I'm going to next is Atlanta. In the prior tower version, I started by just trying to get the planes managed, and then I improved what I was doing, what I was saying, how I was saying it, made some compromises to speak over certain times. So like if I'm dealing with arrivals, I will only talk to arrivals. If the arrival is speaking to me, then I can talk to a departure and try to alternate. And I did a bunch of different things to try and make it as realistic as I could and still manage that much traffic without totally screwing it up. And that was fun. With this game, I don't think that's going to work in the same way. One of the compromises that I was already willing to make to the way I prefer to play was to reduce the amount of traffic. And because the game does allow us to do a little more with what's going to come in on the runways, I wanted to see if I could split out which runways are doing which type of airplane. I'll get to that when we get to the game, if it works. But to that end, and to the point of the comment here, being able to watch my departures so that when they get to a certain altitude, I can send them off is a fair way to handle this slightly more realistically. It does mean that instead of spending my entire time managing the ground radar, I need to look a fair bit more at the actual radar around the airport so that I can see what's happening. And that means I'm going to have to be a lot more attentive. I did some of this play a long time ago where I was trying to actually route planes different directions out of the airport instead of just everybody flying runway heading until they contact departure. It's hard to do specifically because I'm bouncing around to a lot of different airports. And in the way this system is set up, all they really do is list the airport code. I don't know all the airport codes that depart and where everybody goes. So in a lot of what I'm doing, I'm just trying to efficiently get them to a runway and get them out instead of saying, okay, you're going to be turning to the right, going to the north. You need to take off on this runway because that way you don't cross traffic and all that. All that is planned out and set up, and the controllers know a lot more about what's happening and where those planes need to go, as well as the type of aircraft for arrival distances. All that stuff is set up that I don't have to manage, which is why I say I am super amateur at this. But I think by reducing the amount of traffic that I'm trying to deal with, it will allow me to inject a little bit more of that reality into the game. Now, this is the new start guide, and I've highlighted the command for the game that I'm using. And basically what they've done in this manual, which again, this is usually what I have up on one of my other monitors, and I'm using this to help me try to keep track of the different commands, because if I don't play the game consistently, I forget some of the commands or I forget exactly what the wording is, like the line up and wait behind next landing aircraft. All that stuff gets me because in the old game, it used to be line up and wait behind next landing aircraft instead of just line up behind next landing aircraft. And that's the only command that works. But departure, you have cleared for takeoff, cleared for immediate takeoff. I've called out the difference between those. Cleared for takeoff means they'll pull onto the runway, do their throttle up, and then go. Immediate takeoff means they're just going to click all the buttons, throttle up onto the runway, and jam the throttles, and they'll just be going. There will be no parking on the runway. I prefer to use immediate in this because as I said, I'm bouncing between arrivals and departures and a lot of different activity, and I don't need that pilot to wait on the runway because I've got a plane usually coming in behind them. In some cases, there's different runways to stagger that, which helps me set that up. So Atlanta does this, so we'll see how that plays out. Then there's the contact departure, and then the one I was using, which was the immediate contact departure. So basically, it's just the way the game words this, literally the way the game words this, time-saving command. Instead of asking the plane to contact departure once it's airborne, you can ask the pilot to automatically switch over upon reaching a certain altitude, which, again, is not necessarily right. I don't think I've explicitly stated that, but I mentioned that I don't think this is quite the way it's supposed to go, and this comment kind of highlights it's not exactly right. The reason myself and other amateur controllers are doing that is because of this, but it even says that it's a time-saving one to ask them contact departure. So I'm going to try to whittle out of the way of doing this simply because it's not as much of a time-saving as it has been in the past because I spend so long trying to get the tongue twister out, and then I'm spitting out the same command that I'm really not doing much of controlling other than just creating the text for it to happen. So I think by reducing, especially at Atlanta, the quantity of traffic that I'm dealing with a little bit will allow me to do things a little more accurately and properly within the confines of the game and the entertainment value of watching me fall flat on my face as I fail to do this. He did mention in the comment to pull up the official manual, which I did, and at some point I will skim through this, but it is very long, and there are 642 mentions of departure, so reading through the entire departure section, it's not going to be quick reading, especially when this isn't my career choice. I will read it because I am very interested in spending more time learning about some of these things, so I've got that bookmarked and saved to go through at some point in the future, but it will handle all the realities of it. But part of the reason I haven't really looked at this before is I know the game is making a lot of compromises in a lot of different ways that kind of make it hard to focus on the reality of it. And I've called out a number of times that you can come into the game files. So if you go to your airports directory and scroll down, there's a commands file, which is what I'm showing now. And this is the actual commands that we can utilize in the game and what we say to have the game do something. And there's a lot of different things that go on in here. And these just flag certain pre-scripted processes within the game. There's no way for me to break that and inject new commands to it. I can simply have new voice prompts added to allow the game to invoke the same command. That's all I can really do in this. So I could modify these commands to go something more realistically, or I could add the via thing that gets me all the time, or cleared other runway, or any of those things. You can come in here and stack some of these commands, and you can see all these different via taxiway 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, every single option command that they have, depending on how many taxiways. And that's why when I tried to stack too many taxiways, I think it got confused, because beyond 6, I don't think you're really going to be giving them 45 different taxiways to route around, because they're never going to remember them anyway. But again, you can see all these different options. So climb 2. I have avoided using the wind because in this game, the wind really doesn't matter. Honestly, and I wish it wasn't the case. You could, of course, call out that the wind is this number at this many knots and all that stuff. Great. It's just in this game, the wind is completely meaningless. Even if it's a tailwind, I can still land every plane with a tailwind and nobody cares. There's no implication or anything for dealing with the wind other than trying to simulate a bit more realism, which would be good. It's just, again, the way I've been playing is to maximize my utilization of arrivals and departures and try to run 100% of the traffic, because trying to coordinate all of that is what I find fun. that's what I'm going to try to shift out of. So it's going to be a bit of a learning curve for myself, and we'll see how this goes. So I may inject wind at some point in the future, but we'll see. The read you, just doing radio checks, I haven't really had that work prior. I had one or two pop up and do that at some of the other airports, but I never got it to work right. We'll see if I get any of those. Probably not at Atlanta because they don't do as much GA traffic. But again, you've got all these different commands, and you can string as many of these as you want together and up to a specific time set number or frame of reference. And that's what they're doing here. So you call out your airplane and the runway, and then you invoke the cleared for takeoff, you invoke the upon reaching altitude, and then you invoke the contact departure within that phrasing. So you're having all those different things get invoked as you request it to go out. So really that's all you can do. And then you can specify these commands specific to GA, departure, arrivals, everything. I don't know exactly what local means. I've never really understood some of that, but like they don't really have anything specific to GA in here. They've got some that are locked around pushback, taxi landing, things like that, so that the command can't be misconstrued and screw some things up. And then there's some other requirements to say, hey, you can't give them clearance to land unless you've specified the runway. And that means that here, you can see it specifies requirement runway. This is the runway that's required. So I have to give it the runway command in order to give it the cleared to land. So that's how everything's being pulled around and set up to do things. Just as an explanation. So you can come in here and inject however you want to say it. Some of these I've never really had to use because I don't really need to give them radar contact. I could, again, it's the way the game is set up and limited. They've given you some more options than you really need to use in the game. Just unfortunate the way some of the implementation is handled. I would prefer to see a lot of the airplanes coming in from different routes and then lined up and then get them sent over to me when they hit my boundary range, and then I give them that quick clearance. And I'd love to be able to take over just the arrivals, but be able to see the departures moving through the ground as well, or be able to take over just ground. I think that would make the game a lot more powerful because then I can change the roles that I play. I could manage the arrivals for a set window of time at an airport, get all these planes on the ground. Once they're on ground, transfer them to the ground and move on. And then I could take over the ground controller and get them from the runways to their gates, get the departures over to the runways, and then have them contact the tower, do all those transitions. And I think that would be a lot of fun. And then even handling the departures, because then I could focus on the departures and say, okay, you need to go right, you need to go left off these runways, and I could inject all these other commands. But because we're doing everything, it's a very different scenario to what the reality is at most busy airports. Small aircraft or smaller airports, you're not dealing with 15 planes all departing in the same 30-minute window and 30 of them all arriving in that same 30-minute window. You're dealing with maybe 10 planes total in an hour, and some of those are just touch and goes for student traffic or things like that. So I'm not downplaying the difficulty of what they're doing. I'm just saying that the amount of traffic allows one controller to handle more activity at a very lower volume airport. So that's a very long-winded kind of discussion around this really good comment, and I'm very glad that he left this comment. I'd been thinking some about this, but when this comment popped up and went into such detail about how wrong it is, it was like, yeah, because I do want to try to get somewhat close to realism within the confines of the game, it just kind of was like, yeah, I think it's time that I change what I'm doing because I've been doing it the same way for a while, and I don't feel like I've made much meaningful progress in being able to handle the game. So within the confines of the game, I think we can tweak that up and try to pay a bit more attention to a departure altitude. And once we get them to, say, 1,000, 2,000, whatever it is in that range, then I can shuffle them over to their departure. We'll give it, of course, a bit of leeway because I may be pushing somebody back from a gate. I may be doing something else. It's just going to require me to be a lot more attentive to that aerial radar around the airport than I have really ever given it before. Typically, it's just contact departure, contact departure. But as you can see, especially in the last one, it's just rattle off a bunch of commands, go grab the next one, move them around. There's not as much proper controlling and paying attention to what's happening around the airport. So I think I'm going to try to dial back the volume a little bit and see if we can get to a reasonable number and try to be a lot more explanative, whatever the English word is, I can't speak, about what we're actually trying to do in controlling it, to try and map their routes and try to organize the traffic so we get fewer indications or fewer situations, instances of airplanes running into each other. I gripe about that a lot because two planes just wouldn't drive into each other when they can see each other like that. But sometimes in this game, they both think they have the right of way and just crash. Again, that is on me, but again, two real pilots wouldn't drive into a plane they can see right in front of them. Maybe they would, I don't know. But anyway, I just want to call out that I really appreciate the comment, the feedback, and I think it'll be a bit fun to go through this learning curve to try and switch up from doing the way this game kind of created the, as was said in the comment, kind of lazy way, because then I don't have to worry about the airplane anymore, which is exactly why I started using that command. It gave me the opportunity to put my focus on my departures from the gates and the pushing and all these other different things. But I think we can try to pull it all together and get a little more realism into what I'm doing in the control. So hope that explains it. Hope you understand a little bit more about how the game works and maybe a bit more about the reality of it. I know I glossed over a lot and I probably gave some incorrect explanations to that. The comments will for sure clean that up. But the game does allow us to do some things. Let's see what we can do within the confines of the game's limitations and code and how we can try to make it a little more realistic and maybe something more fun to watch, because I'm going to fall on my face a lot trying to pick up new ways of doing things now that I've got all these bad habits to break and try to figure out. So thank you for watching, and I will see you at Atlanta when we start that series.